Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 12, which is our final chapter out of the book. Hopefully you found these videos somewhat informational. Again, a lot of times I try to prep you for the quizzes for the week in these videos, so hopefully you notice a little bit of a trend, and hopefully they've been at least a little bit entertaining as you've watched them throughout this semester. Now, chapter 12, what we're going to be taking a look at is Europe emerging from the Middle Ages into what we call the Renaissance or rebirth. So again, we kind of looked at the Middle Ages over the last few chapters. Again, we have the Dark Ages into the Middle Ages, into the High Middle Ages. Again, we see Europe starting to emerge. Now, there are still lots of issues, right? We still have war. We still have the Black Death. All of that is going to at least somewhat decrease during the Renaissance period. And again, a lot of times when we think of the Renaissance, we think of the art and the beauty that comes along with this particular time period. So that is certainly something we're going to focus in on when it comes to this chapter. Now, part of what we're going to see in the Renaissance movement or Renaissance time period is kind of this emergence in Europe of kind of the modern state, right? So places we would recognize. Again, if you look at a map of Europe today, you're going to see in Italy, you're going to see in Germany, you're going to see in Spain, France. If you look at a map of Europe during the Renaissance, you don't necessarily see that. The map doesn't look the exact same. But what we are starting to see is a formulation of what's going to be modern day Europe. So in a little bit, we're going to talk about the unification of Spain. The first thing we're going to mention, though, is the Germanic principalities. Again, I mentioned this a few times in the videos. People speak German, they're Germanic, but there isn't a Germany, and that's really not going to be the case for another 400 years. But we do have something called the Hanseatic League, which is a group of northern German principalities that work together for commercial interests, trade, supply, demand. And they work together for military reasons. Again, each of these small little areas of Germany isn't strong enough to protect themselves. As a group, they do have each other's back and they're able to kind of work together for that protection. Again, we see this going forward. We see this in modern day Europe with things like the EU or the UN, all of these different kinds of organizations that countries join. We see this starting again, even 400-600 years ago in the Renaissance period. So the first area of the Renaissance that your book really focuses in on is what happens in Italy. And again, Italy is certainly a place we think of when we think of the Renaissance, the art movements, all those different kinds of things. Now, if you remember back in our previous chapter, we talked about the Black Death and how a huge portion of the European population is decimated. They're dead. They're gone. So one of the things we really see beginning to reemerge in Europe at this time, and especially a place like Italy, is actually slavery. So again, even though we're in that Renaissance, we're in that kind of rebirth period of time, there is still slavery existing, especially in Southern Europe. Places like in Italy, places like Spain, you are likely to see this. Again, these slaves could be from Africa. These slaves could be from Muslim parts of the Middle East. But again, because of this lack of population, there simply aren't enough people to build the things they want to build. There aren't enough people to work in the house doing domestic things that they want to be able to have happen. So again, slavery really kind of spikes during this time period. Obviously, it will, again, start to decline in Europe and eventually disappear there, obviously, before it disappears in places like America, certainly. But again, you start to see the people doing the work shifting a little bit to relying more on slave labor. One of the things we see is kind of the role of the family during the Renaissance. Again, as this rebirth is going on, people do start to collect more money. We mentioned the idea of slavery. You don't maybe have as much maybe domestic work to do if you're a wife, a child, something along those lines. But one thing to point out within that family life is that childbirth is still extremely deadly. Again, nowadays, you get pregnant, you have a child, you go to the hospital, and for the most part, things are going to go really well. Again, it's an incredibly low percentage. In Europe at this period of time, it's about 10% of mothers die during childbirth, right? So again, 1 out of every 10 women will not survive their pregnancy, which again is a huge number. So again, this is one of the leading causes of death if you are a female in Europe at this time, is simply trying to have children. So again, that family structure is certainly altered by those things as well. Now, other kingdoms in throughout Italy, again, we kind of mentioned the same thing with Germany, right? People maybe speak Italian, people identify this as a time, that there isn't a country called Italy. They're not Italians. You're from the Papal States. You're from Florence. You're from Milan. You're from Naples. You're not considering yourself an Italian. Now, what we see is that central and northern Italy becomes very sophisticated. This is where the Renaissance takes off. There is financial ability there. Their finances grow, especially with the Medici family out of Florence. They become kind of the bankers of Europe. They supply money to the Catholic Church. Again, they're huge, and Florence has tons of money. And the Renaissance is able to flourish there because they have so much money they can pay for this art. Same thing in the Papal States. Again, home to the Catholic Church. They have tons of money. They're able to allow the Renaissance to flourish. The farther south you get in Italy, down into Naples, you don't see this as much. This is a very backwards, incredibly rural, agrarian society. Not a lot of money, not a lot of structure. So again, even within the Italian peninsula, it really depends on where you are as to what kind of Renaissance you're going to be seeing. One major invention that comes about during the Renaissance period is the idea of the printing press. Now, the printing press itself has been used in China all the way back as far as the 12th century. So again, we're talking hundreds of years. It's finally making its emergence in Europe. And the most famous example of the printing press being used is by Johann Gutenberg, who prints the first Bible. The reason why this is important, again, every Bible written up to this point is literally handwritten. And again, you have these monasteries with these monks sitting by candlelight, literally writing every single word. And that's the only way to reproduce books at this time is by hand. With the printing press, you just put the letters on a machine, you put on a piece of paper, you stamp it down, boom, you got a page. Next sheet of paper, boom, you got, and you can literally just print and print and print. And the ability to mass produce books, and specifically the Bible, is going to completely change Europe. Now, everyone can have access to books. Everyone can have access to a Bible. People are starting to read the Bible. So again, literacy rates skyrocket because now books are accessible. Again, you didn't need to read because you never had a book in your life. So what did it make a difference? Now people can genuinely get their hands on books. So now reading becomes more of a big deal. This idea of being able to read the Bible makes people start to question the Bible. We're going to talk about some issues within the Catholic Church here in a moment. And again, people having access to the Bible is a major reason why that's the case. And again, it all goes back to Gutenberg and the printing press. We talked about some of the artists during the Renaissance here. We're going to talk about Michelangelo. Again, paints the Sistine Chapel, which is basically the official Pope church within the Vatican. So again, we've all seen the beautiful painted ceiling and the walls of the Sistine Chapel. If you ever get a chance to check it out in person, it's incredibly beautiful. You're not supposed to take pictures when you're in the Sistine Chapel, though, so heads up on that. But there's another person named Brunelleschi, who, again, is a famous sculptor employed by the rich families of Florence. And again, even if you walk around places like Rome, if you walk around places like Florence today, you still see these works of art, these sculptures, the fountains, all of these things still exist. Again, going all the way back to the Renaissance, and they're beautiful and amazing. And again, it really allows us to kind of reach out and look and touch that history even still today. Some other places around Europe that we begin to see changes. Europe, we go into the Tudor dynasties. Again, Richard III is defeated by Henry the Tudor. He becomes Henry VII. His son, Henry VIII, is going to become a very famous / notorious king of England who is going to separate England from the Catholic Church. But that'll be for future world civilization classes. But again, we see a changing in the royal family. And again, that change in the royal family allows Parliament to gain a little bit of strength, right? You're swapping out who the monarchies are. You got a new guy in town. So again, Parliament's able to gain a little bit more strength, and that's going to continue to grow throughout the centuries. The next major place the book takes a look at is Spain. Now remember, going back a few hundred years, Spain is under Muslim control. Slowly over time, we see Christian armies invading, reconquering those lands. Portugal has essentially reconquered itself. Most of Spain has been reconquered except for a very small little part in kind of the southeastern part of Spain called Granada that is still under Muslim control at this point in time when the Renaissance begins. What you see, though, is that the two major kingdoms of Spain, Castile and Aragon, basically marry off their children, right? So again, you have the children of these Ferdinand and Isabel being married together, really kind of unifying Spain. Now, they don't necessarily consider it unified. They do still consider themselves separate parts. But again, as their offspring kind of merge together and all this, is going to become one Spain. But again, by combining these two specific parts of Spain, the two largest kingdoms, they're able to combine forces and they're able to retake Granada. And by 1492, Granada officially falls. It is now completely Christianized. There is no longer kind of a Muslim stronghold in at least this part of Europe. We do still see some Muslim states over in the eastern part of Europe. But again, Spain has officially been completely re-Christianized. Also, 1492 is kind of another important year. The book doesn't necessarily touch on it, but Ferdinand and Isabel are going going to finance the explorations of Christopher Columbus, who we know in 1492 sails the ocean blue. So again, all of this is going on during this exact same time period. Now that Spain is completely back in Christian hands, one of the things we also see Spain doing is getting rid of anyone who isn't Christian. We know they've expelled the Muslims. Now they're going to look to the Jews. They essentially give them kind of a 2-year time period, either convert to Christianity, get out of town, or else. And the or else is that you're systematically rounded up and executed. So again, Jewish people kind of being, persecuted, a very common theme we've seen throughout this world civilization class this semester, and again, continues on in Spain as well. Now, we mentioned that the church is going through changes in the previous chapter. We talked about people really beginning to question the church, right? We talked about the things like purchasing the relics and, time in purgatory, and all these people starting to say, wait a second, church, it seems a bit extreme, right? Like, you shouldn't be able to buy your way out of, purgatory. You shouldn't be able to buy your way into heaven, or all these different kinds of things. So we do start to see some reformations within the church, right? Trying to unify. We talked about having 2 popes for a long period of time back in that previous chapter. So again, we do start to see a reunification of the Catholic Church, the Renaissance going on. We talked about the creation of beautiful works of art for the church. All these different things are going on at this time period. Now, the biggest thing I would point out, kind of foreshadowing, if you ever take a World Civilizations 2, is going to be the Reformation, which is where we're going to start to see new forms of Christianity. And again, a lot of that goes back to Gutenberg and the publication of the Bible. As more people begin to read the Bible, they start to say, there really isn't anything in the Bible about the Catholic Church or about popes or bishops or pretty much anything of that like. And that's going to lead to the Protestant Reformation. And again, people like Martin Luther. But again, that's what we're going to take a look at in World Civilizations 2 if you ever get a chance to take that class. So again, thank you for hanging out with me this semester. Hopefully you found it very educational. If there's anything else I can help you with, please let me know. Make sure you take the quiz and write your discussion for the week. And then next week you'll be taking the final exam. Good luck to you.